and welcome to the introduction to the Level 3 Science Industry Maintenance Technician Endpoint Assessment. In the following slides, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how apprenticeship standards are maintained and regulated, as well as the people that are involved in overseeing the quality of endpoint assessments. And then we'll focus on your journey to endpoint assessment through Gateway into your endpoint assessment window, and then talk about each of the different hurdles involved in this apprenticeship standard, what to expect, and how you can best prepare for your endpoint assessment. So let's get started with the first part of this, which is who regulates apprenticeships in England, and that is an organisation known as the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. They work really closely with industry, so they'll have different industry groups that develop different apprenticeship standards, and they'll make sure that each of the apprenticeship standards effectively look the same, that they have the same components within them, that each of them has an occupational profile, the knowledge, skills and behaviour statements and duties that an apprentice needs to work towards and develop whilst they're on programme, and the all-important endpoint assessment plan. So really what the rules are, what the conditions are, what the hurdles look like for an apprentice, and how the endpoint assessment organisation can live up to that, what they need to do in order to effectively deliver an endpoint assessment for somebody. The other organisation that's heavily involved in terms of assessment quality is Ofqual. So Ofqual will recognise each of the endpoint assessment awarding organisations such as Marshall Assessment, and they will make sure that those assessment organisations are doing the right things in terms of developing their assessment materials, the quality of assessment decisions that are made, and the kind of end-to-end process to make sure that each apprentice is fairly assessed. Okay, so moving on. If you go to the iFate web page, you will be able to find the Science Industry Maintenance Technician page, and this is what it looks like at the moment. It has in here, as I said before, information about the role, about how long it might take to develop somebody to be able to offer those knowledge, skills and behaviours to their employer at that correct level. It talks about any qualifications that are needed and are expected, certainly in terms of English and maths, as well as any other engineering type qualifications that might be needed. And in purple on the right hand side towards the top, you can see that there is an assessment plan. So for Marshall Assessment, this is really where we start. It's what we need to look through. It's how we will develop our different assessment materials and processes, how we will train our assessors, and all importantly, how we will go out and perform those assessments with you in mind. So please do have a look at that webpage and do have a look perhaps at that PDF document, the assessment plan. It's not the most stimulating document, but it will give you a flavour of exactly what's involved. And if you're more interested in it, in things that I'm saying here, you can learn more by perhaps reading that document as well. One thing I would say is that Marshall Assessment have created a series of guides and documents to support you for each of the assessment hurdles within the Science Industry Maintenance Technician apprenticeship. So do look at those, and they're a theme throughout this presentation. I'll keep referring back to them, but make sure that you do look at the documents that we provide. Again, it's not the most stimulating, but actually, from your own point of view, if you want to prepare properly for your endpoint assessment, you must read through the guidance documents. Without doing that, you really will have surprises on that day, which you want to try and avoid as much as possible. So where we fit in through the whole of the kind of process is that we're almost at the very end of this cog diagram, and you can see endpoint assessment there. So the biggest part is you training on those knowledge, skills and behaviours, any numeracy and literacy, and making sure you've got that 20% off the job. You could probably, most people would be doing some kind of academic qualification as well, alongside learning all of those different skills. So you'll get eventually to a point where you've finished everything that you need to do yourself, your employer and your training provider. You all agree that you've reached the end, and that's where Marshall Assessment will come in and check on behalf of iFate and the government that you have indeed finished everything that you need to, and that you can go through Gateway into your endpoint assessment window. So that's where it starts to get a bit interesting, and that's what we're going to start to focus on. So in this document, or in this image rather, you can see the endpoint assessment section, and there are actually 3 different assessment hurdles for you to overcome to complete your apprenticeship program. The first one is an observation. So in the workplace, you will be followed by a Marshall independent assessor from Marshall Assessment, and also an employer registered assessor, so somebody from your workplace, and I'll come on to that kind of relationship and how that works in a moment. That's known as the SAT, which stands for Synoptic Assessment Test. And then there's the professional discussion, known as the Vocational Competence Discussion, or VCD. That's just you and the Marshall Independent Assessor, where you're having this discussion. You're supported by your portfolio of evidence, or your competence log, whatever you call it, with your training provider. And then finally, there is a scenario-based case study. It's probably the closest thing that you'll have to a very formal exam. So it's done under closed book exam conditions, no talking, no looking at anything, that kind of environment that you'll be used to from previous exams in your academic careers. Okay, so let's get a bit more kind of clear on the different terms that are used by me, certainly, and that you may come across when you read some of our guidance documents. So we talk about IA as independent assessor or independent assurer, and that's somebody from Marshall Assessment. I mentioned ERA, the employer registered assessor, already, and that is somebody from your workplace that is there to support you for the observation part only. So they will be able to talk to the IA on any points that they need to clarify. So they might come into your environment, not be really familiar with the way that your company works, and then they can talk to the ERA and say, what does that mean? How did that work? Was that supposed to go that way? That kind of thing, just to clarify everything. And I'll talk a little bit more about the role of the ERA as we go through. TP, training provider, that might slip out as I'm talking through these slides. I've talked about evaluation log, your portfolio. That's everything that you're developing, all the evidence on program that you're working on, that will be there to support you during your endpoint assessment. And obviously it's also there to testify to the development work that you have done over the months and months on program. So we talked about the SAT, which is the observation, the VCD, that professional discussion, and we've also talked about the controlled exam conditions case study. I also should mention, actually, I was looking at behaviours logs or evaluation log, that there is a separate form for the behaviour elements on this program. So you'll probably be familiar already that there needs to be a behaviour evaluation process carried out, and the rules of the assessment plan state that it needs to be done at least 3 times whilst you're on program. So it can be done many more times than that, but a minimum of 3, and you'll be evaluated at either not meeting or exceeding expectations in terms of those behavioural statements. So hopefully you're all familiar with that already. Okay, and for anybody that has had reasonable adjustments made to exam condition tests or assessments in the past, those can still apply. So any of those kind of people that need extra time with anything, or any other adjustments to the assessment method, you can apply for those. And just like any examining organisation, we will make sure that we are doing our best to accommodate those wherever we can. Okay. So one of the things that we need to discuss is something called the Work-Based Learning Guide. This is something which was created when this apprenticeship standard was first got off the ground, and it covers all of the different elements that you should be able to either know, or the skills that you should be able to do. It doesn't cover behaviours because that's done separately, but there's lots and lots of different assessment criteria or statements in there that we can assess. So that's what we're using, and all our documentation for each of the hurdles very clearly states which criteria from the Work-Based Learning Guide we are looking at or looking for each of the 3 different hurdles of your endpoint assessment. So please, hopefully you're familiar with these. Yours might not look exactly the same. Some of these might be built into your competence evaluation logs. It might be on one file or another ePortfolio system. This is where they come from. And there are around 60 of these in total. I haven't obviously got them all here, but you can see the flavour of them, and hopefully those are very familiar to you. Some of them are optional in this, so if it's optional to do, you probably won't be assessed on it, I would have thought. In most cases, lots of them actually also give examples as well, so that's not an exhaustive list. So there might be other things that you've got that are similar to those that fit in, and that would be absolutely fine. So it's probably a good time for us to talk about the overall grading for this. So this apprenticeship standard, you can either fail, clearly, like every single other apprenticeship standard, and hopefully that won't happen. You can get an overall grade of pass, or you can achieve an overall grade of distinction. And this table is a bit busy, but we'll come on to it later on. Effectively, there are 4 different elements to the standard itself. There's the behaviours evaluation log, which is the second one down. Now this is reviewed, as I said before, in the workplace, so it's before Gateway. So Marshall Assessment don't assess behaviours, it's your employer, but we do take the evidence of that assessment into account when we are filing for your final grade. So the observation, the SAT, is pass or fail. So there is no higher grading distinction kind of grading terminology for that one. You either are competent and you pass, or you don't. Then the vocational competence discussion can be something that you pass if you get 50% or more, or if you get 75%, so 60 out of 80, then that's something that will give you a distinction grade. The case study is marked out of 40, so you will have a need to get 50% from your from the marks that you get to pass, and in order to get a distinction, you need 75% overall in terms of the marks that that you have for that. Okay, right. So yeah, finally, if you get a pass in any of the elements, then you'll be a pass overall, no matter if you get distinctions as well. So in order to get distinction effectively, you need to get a pass in your observation, exceeding expectations in all of the behavioural areas from the behaviours log. The professional discussion, you'll need to get more than 60 or 60 or more. And in the case study, actually, it would be 30 out of 40 in terms of being able to achieve a distinction in that one. Okay. So let's have a look at the synoptic assessment test, so the observation and what you can expect from that. So effectively, it's to validate the fact that you are competent, that you're safe, that you're able to carry out your job role competently to the right standards. There is a document called the SAT plan, so we don't leave this up to chance. So what we don't want to do is come in and to observe you on a day when you're sitting next to a computer and you're doing some data input. So, you know, if that was to happen, you wouldn't be able to pass the observation because you wouldn't be able to demonstrate the different competencies that you hold within your workplace. So there is a document that you can fill out so that you're happy, and we are happy that you're going to do lots of different things, which will give us lots of evidence to put forwards, and that you can pass that observation if everything goes as it should. We will sit with the registered employer assessor that we've identified, and we'll give them some training so they know what they're going to be doing, and they will assist with the observation, but it will be run by the Marshall Independent Assessor. At the end of the observation, they will check each other's notes and make sure nothing has been missed, and they will then agree on a grade, whether that's fail or pass. The final say so on whether or not that is where you end up is to do with Marshall assessment. We will independently then check a quality assure the notes and the decision, and then publish a grade after that. So you won't be told if you've passed or failed on the day. That's something that won't happen because it needs to be quality reviewed and checked afterwards. Okay, so the second element, if you like, of your endpoint assessment, the second hurdle will be that competence discussion, that professional discussion. Naturally, when an assessor sees you doing things in the workplace, and then later on they're going to ask you questions, they're going to refer back to, in some cases at least, what they've seen you do. So that's where these two things are linked. So the SAT will influence the type of questions or how those questions are phrased during your professional discussion part, the VCD. So that's an interesting point that I'll make. So if they say, I saw you doing A or B yesterday or the day before or whenever it is, can you tell me why you did it that way? You know, that's the kind of thing that you can expect. So they're not done in, you know, glorious isolation, as it were. So these are the things that the synoptic assessment test effectively is looking for. We want to be able to see you demonstrating your understanding of the procedures to maintain equipment, whether or not that's mechanical, electrical, or instrumentation, as required by your employer. Following your maintenance processes. We want you to be able to use drawings or specification diagrams. You actually may not need to do that because you've already learned the skills and you know exactly what you need to do for the thing that you're maintaining, but you definitely need to be able to demonstrate that during the observation. So if you've got specification diagrams or drawings, electrical circuitry, whatever it might be, then there's your opportunity to walk the independent assessor through that. We want you to be safe. We want you to be able to carry out all of your activities efficiently and safely, be able to reinstate the workplace afterwards, taking away any barriers and reinstating machinery, and update the software solutions, or even the notepads and the paperwork that is necessary at the end of that process. So all of those things need to be in there, and hopefully that doesn't cause you any issues whatsoever. There are some themes as well, which I'll mention in a moment. There are 5 themes which, if you're wondering if you should include something in your SAT, that will help you to decide, which I'll come on to in a moment. But the process itself, the assessor will turn up on the day at a time agreed. We'll have a chat with you, put you at ease, make sure that you're happy. If you've got any questions, then they'll give you an opportunity to ask those and get everything cleared up before you start. But they will ask you for your ID. We need to make sure that you are who you say you are and that you haven't got somebody to do the observation in your place. Never known that happen, but that's part of the rules of the process. So we'll confirm your ID, and it is a timed process. There is quite a wide range of time. The observation needs to last at least 2 hours, and it cannot go past 4 hours. So you've got that kind of window that you must at least be being observed for 2 hours. And it depends how many different things you're doing in those hours. Are you covering all of the criteria that you need to cover? Some of the tasks may take a long time. And you may not in 2 hours get everything done. So therefore, you've obviously got that range. But at 4 hours, the observation will stop. Okay, so hopefully everything will be done and you'll be able to evidence everything that you need in 4 hours. So they'll make a note of the time and then they'll obviously observe you. I'd like to say they don't use a clipboard, but often that's the easiest thing to use. So they'll have paperwork on a clipboard and they'll be following you around, and they're not trying to trip you up. If they're writing furiously on their pads, that's a good thing because there's a lot of evidence that they're seeing. They want to find that evidence of your good working practices against the criteria. It is probably good practice for you to kind of walk and talk a little. You don't need to do a running commentary on everything you do, but if you do something in particular that you know is directed towards some of those areas on the previous slide, or some of the criteria that you know contained within the observation, then by all means talk about it. If you're doing something because of safety, if you're doing something because of quality, if you're doing something because of regulations, why not just say, this is why I'm doing this, or this is what I'm doing here, just so that it's clear, and it will help both the employer registered assessor and the Marshall independent assessor to get the best notes that they can and the best evidence for you. So they'll take notes, as we said, as they go through. Once it's finished, then they will again write the time down and make sure that the duration was more than 2, but not more than 4 hours long. And then you can go off for a break, for a well-earned break, and the ERA and the Marshall independent assessor will have a sit down and go through the notes and make sure that they've caught everything that they need to be and agree a grade. If a grade can't be again, it will go back anyway to Marshall assessment, and in terms of quality processes, then they will review the evidence and deliver a grade from that perspective. I mentioned there were some themes, 5 areas for the observation itself. So there are some of those things that we saw before in the bulleted box on a couple of slides ago, but the general themes are working safely, following standard operating procedures or instructions or maintenance processes in this case, complying with regulations, following quality systems, and having the appropriate vocational skills, which is effectively, can you use the tools for your job? Do you know how to do those things and manipulate those instruments or the machinery? Do you know how to take things apart and safely put them back together again? Those are the kinds of things that is the last one there. Okay, so it is, as I said, graded at pass or fail. There is a plan, a document there. Familiarize yourself with it. Know what you're going to do on that day. Get everything set up in advance. You could even practice it if it's something that you feel that would benefit you. But my advice is never do anything that's new to you. Even if you might be signed off competent, if it's relatively recent and you're under a little bit of pressure, what you don't want to do is forget what to do and have to ask somebody, because if you're asking somebody, if you're having to be supervised to do it and shown how, then you will fail this element of your endpoint assessment. Okay. So the criteria that we look for is very clear in the SAT plan, so you'll know all those, but you may also see in the SAT plan that there are other criteria which we say are additional. They're not mandatory. Those are the kind of criteria that we often see during an observation, but they're not necessary. The reason that we do that is so that the assessor can mark out where they've seen you clearly doing something, because those criteria are picked up later in the professional discussion. If you've already discussed that in your SAT plan, they can tick it off in advance, and it probably saves you a little bit of time later on. What they will do is they may well focus on higher grading criteria for that section. So if you talk about the way in which you deal with health and safety in the workplace and you demonstrate that in the SAT, they might ask you, why is that a good thing, or what would happen if you didn't, and concentrate on perhaps some higher grading criteria later on. What I would say is focus on what's needed so you don't fail. Don't worry about additional criteria. If they see it, they'll make a note of it. It's great, but make sure that you're at least getting all the mandatory criteria done. That's just really as a point. You might see additional criteria there. Don't worry about that too much. It'll look after itself. If they don't see stuff, they'll ask you anyway during the professional discussion, and you won't lose out. Okay, so ensure you're doing things that you're confident in doing. As I said, don't do things that are new to you, because it can go wrong. Make sure everything's planned in advance, and it's very clear that you've got everything that you need for that day, just to put less pressure on you. If you need to take breaks, it can be a long time. Then obviously we just stop the clock, you go for break, come back, start the clock again, and go from there. So don't worry too much about any of those things. It should look and feel from your perspective like any other day, apart from you've got a couple of people following you around. Okay. So the last point there, no coaching and mentoring, I've already said. So if you're being coached to do something or told what to do, you will fail. If there's a process that does need you to be supervised, and that is the standard process, that's fine. That is not a problem. Not saying that you can't be supervised to do something, because there are some procedures that just naturally need that interaction with more than one person. That isn't a problem. It's when you've got to be told what to do, when you coaching and things like that, that's where we draw the line. And clearly, if you're doing anything that's unsafe, that brings you into harm or anybody else, then that would be a fail also. Okay, let's move on. Let's have a talk about this competence discussion. Again, there is a guidance document with this that I would definitely say you need to look at. The more planning that you do, the more obvious it is that you've planned during the actual thing itself. For those people that don't look at the guidance documents, for those people that don't put in a bit of time to have a look at the different areas that they're going to be quizzed about or questioned about, the criteria, that know where they might be able to find good examples, those are the people that do really well. The people that don't do that really don't perform very well. It's a bit like night and day, the difference. So my advice is look at the documentation, consider the areas that you need to discuss, and you can bring evidence with you. So anything that's evidence in your competence portfolio, you can bring that in. Bring the document in, our guidance document. If you put notes in next to a section as an aid memoir, just to say, oh yeah, I can talk about this, perfect. It isn't a memory test. It's about whether or not you know why you do what you do and how to do it. That's really what it's focusing on. So really do prepare, really do bring in supporting documents. If there is an acronym that you always goes out your mind when you need to recall it, or you don't quite remember exactly the process steps 1, 2, 3, or 4, whatever it might be, bring it in with you. You work towards it, you know it, you have that there. You can talk to the assessor about it. You can pick up documents, show them, whether that's electronic or whether it's hard copy and they're in front of you. So there will be 12 topic areas. You will be asked an open question. So it might well be around health and safety systems in your workplace. So tell me about those. There's an open question. This will allow you to then talk about the different areas that you know is contained, the different criteria that is contained within that first topic area, because you've got the guidance documents and you know what you need to talk about. If you haven't done that, the assessor is going to have to ask you lots and lots of follow-up questions. You only have an hour and a half maximum. It's very difficult if you haven't done preparation for you to go through and tick off all of the pass criteria and all of the higher grading criteria and come out with a distinction. If you don't prepare, the best you can hope for is a pass. So do prepare. You really owe it to yourself to put a bit of effort in and do the very best you can on that day. So you'll be asked maybe some prompt questions. If there's any areas that you haven't explored that they just would like you to, then yes, they can prompt you through that as they go through the different areas, and here they are. So working safely, to do with regulations, then risk assessment, operations, you can read them. So there are quite a few areas, and we've got an hour and a half. So bear that in mind. The more prep you do, the more succinct examples you've got, really good examples that you can say, yeah, have a look at this. This is how I work, the better. And as I say, and you heard me say and repeat many times, it's all about preparation. It's open book. You can have things in there with you. That's absolutely fine. I would say absolutely do not read, do not write out something and say this is almost like a script and read, because that will not be usable in terms of evidence. We need you to be able to talk about what you do, not read words on a page. So yes, you might have examples and you can make that come alive for the assessor, but do not read like a script from bullets or anything like that. But yes, use the document and walk us and talk us through it. Okay. So here's an example of that document, the guidance documents that I said. So you can see this is area number 5, environmental and resource management. You can see the criteria from the work-based learning guide in the second column along. Then you can see what kind of thing we're expecting for you to be able to pass and the types of things that you need to talk about if you want to achieve a distinction grade in that area. So the more times you can tick off more of those criteria, the more marks you get, the closer you get towards that threshold of 60 out of 80 and get a distinction. Okay, so you could print this document out, you could write some little notes on there to tell you where things are. And what I would say is if you go through these and you look at number 17, for example, understand environmental risk assessments. So different from risk assessments for health and safety. This is around the environment. If you've got a great answer for that, if that's the kind of thing that you're involved with all the time, great. You probably don't need anything to support you with that. If, on the other hand, number 54, discarding components in line with local rules and environmental guidelines, you need that that crutch almost, then write in exactly where your evidence is around that or what your example might be as a brief note, and that will allow you to remember it. It takes a bit of pressure off you and focus on the bits of those numbers, of those criteria that you need support with, rather than the things that you know you can talk about anytime, anywhere. Okay, so moving on finally to the scenario case study. This is a controlled test. It will be the closest thing that you have for your EPA that feels like a traditional exam. So phones away, smartwatches away, free from distraction, quiet room, signs on the wall, exam in progress, all of that kind of thing. So there could be times where we are giving you a paper version, so we might be there with you face to face, or it might well be, and in most cases, an online platform called Rogo. So if that's the case and you're using Rogo, even if it isn't the case, actually, I would suggest that you follow the links that you are sent so that you can get onto that system well before the day of your endpoint assessment. You can make sure that you can actually access it through firewalls or anything else that you've got set up wherever you're going to be doing this, and that you're familiar with the software and how it works. Take away all of that worry from the actual endpoint assessment day when you're doing it for real. And on there you will find some past papers, so you'll be able to go through a previous scenario case study. You'll be able to look at the questions, answer those, and then your training provider will have the mark scheme. So once you've gone through it, you can then talk to your training provider. Great preparation. What is it that Marshall Assessment were looking for? What were the types of answers that they were expecting? How are those answers phrased? To give you an idea of what it is that we need from you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The whole thing, however, is designed for you to be able to demonstrate your ability to transfer your understanding and knowledge. So the scenario that you read will not be you in your job doing what you do, but it will be in a similar position for somebody who is a science industry maintenance technician. It could be in a completely different part of the science sector to you. But those themes of safety, regulations, quality, continuous improvement, those are the kinds of things that will be the theme. So it's about you applying what you've learned to the scenario questions in place. We're not expecting you to say, this is what I would do in my job. We want to know what you would do if this was you in that job. Okay, so that's really important. The other things are really, in terms of hints and tips, really what you will have heard before from any lecturer or teacher that's talked to you about exams. Read the question. Make sure you absolutely understand what that question is asking you to do. Make sure that you have also taken note of how many marks are attributed to that question. So make sure that if it's a 1 mark question, you don't write for an hour and a half on it. Because it's only 1 mark. If it's 4 marks, then they probably, in fact, they will want 4 different examples given in that particular instance. So 4 separate pieces of information that you would need to give. So the reason that the marks are given at the end of each question is for your benefit, not for Marshall Assessment. It's so that you know how much detail and depth or how many examples to give. Not for us. We already know what we want from you, but it's for you. So please read the question clearly, make sure you understand it, and have a look at the mark scheme and how many marks you've got. So the best advice I can give for this is more is more. The more you can write, the better it will be. Do not be brief in your responses. We cannot read something and say to ourselves, I know what they thought there. Yeah, I think I know what they were saying, and give you the mark. If it's not on the page, we cannot guess what you were thinking. Be very clear about your thoughts. Don't allude to something without actually writing it in. Now, you've got up to 2.5 hours to do this, so you've got plenty of time. And make sure that you've got everything that you can think of on that page. It's over 40 marks, so there's a lot that needs to be said. So if you do finish early, go back, have a think. Is there anything else you can put in? And go back and add to it. Use your time wisely. Okay, the final point here is about command verbs. So the questions will have command verbs in them. So if it asks you to evaluate something and you describe it, you won't get the marks that you will be expecting to get. If you're describing something, then you're giving an account, or you're giving some features, some points. You're describing it clearly. But to evaluate something, you're talking about its strengths, its weaknesses, its good points, its bad points, and you can draw a conclusion from that. You could say overall it's this. So they're very different ways of answering a question. So you won't get any more command verbs than are on this page. Just be clear that you know what they are and look out for them on the question. Make sure that if you're saying to explain or describe or evaluate, that you spot that and you answer the questions appropriately. Okay, so going back to the grading and away from the 3 hurdles itself, once you've finished, all of this evidence will be taken in. We will need to quality assure it. It can be up to 3 weeks from your final hurdle before you find out exactly what your grade is. So that's 15 working days. You will need, if to pass, not to fail any of the elements, at least. To get a pass, you need to to get distinction, sorry, you need to have passed your observation. You need to have been awarded exceeding expectation for each of the behaviour statements by your employer. And then you need to achieve 75% in the professional discussion and in the case study. So it's a really high bar. Unfortunately, this standard doesn't have a merit where people might have a pass in the competence discussion, but distinction in the case study, which might give you a merit in some apprenticeship standards. In this one, it's fail, pass, or distinction. So there aren't huge numbers of people that might get distinction. So it's a really high bar because there is no middle ground for it. If the worst comes to the worst and you do fail an element, you can resit that element and still get a pass overall. You can't get distinction, but you can pass overall. So if you just miss out on the professional discussion, but you at least pass everything else, you can retake it, you can resit it, as you know, and get that back up to a pass and still complete successfully. So do be aware of that, and do talk to your training provider about the results. They will give you those results, and I'm sure they'll give you all the advice that you need when you get those. Okay, so at Gateway, everything needs to be finished. So again, right back to the start again. We've got your behaviours log, you've got your completed portfolio of evidence, everything is in place, and that's when you'll go through your Gateway. It's that point in which we'll confirm your endpoint assessment date, and you can obviously make sure that you're happy with that and it fits in with all of your plans. So make sure that that you're ready. So don't go through Gateway unless you're ready. These are the other kind of things that we would need, the typical evidence that we would need. Okay, so that's everything that I've got. My kind of overarching kind of last point for you is, do take your endpoint assessment seriously. You may be the best employee that your employer has ever had. That doesn't mean that you're going to ace your endpoint assessment without looking at the guidance documents and properly preparing. If you do that, you'll put yourself in an excellent position to do really, really well. So finally, from me, I'd just like to wish everybody really good luck with your endpoint assessment. Fingers crossed it goes swimmingly well for everyone, and all the best in your future careers. Thank you.